Never being prepared for or used to the abuse, the children, nonetheless, were always waiting for an explosion to happen. And one day it did. Dad grabbed the wooden broom with a metal covering to hold the bristles together and called the children into the living room. The four older children knew what to expect, and yet were a bit stunned when Dad made them once again line up and wait for their beating. Hello, you are listening to In My Words. I hope through my words you will gain insight, knowledge, and a deeper appreciation and understanding of this mysterious and intricate world. Thank you for joining me. Chapter 34, Prison Life. Dad started his new job working the graveyard shift. His hours were from midnight to 8:30 a.m. During the first year of guarding people, Dad stopped smoking. No one knew why or even how he did it, but he did. He quit cold turkey. The first few months of non-smoking were difficult. Dad was much crabbier than usual and took out his aggression on his wife and the four older children. Never being prepared for or used to the abuse, the children, nonetheless, were always waiting for an explosion to happen. And one day it did. Dad grabbed the wooden broom with a metal covering to hold the bristles together and called the children into the living room. The four older children knew what to expect, and yet were a bit stunned when Dad made them once again line up and wait for their beating. As the monster worked his way through each child, something changed, and by the time the fourth child, which happened to be Scott, felt the broom making its mark, the monster finally lost its hold. As the last whack of the broom hit the boy, Dad raised it once again and then suddenly stopped its descent in midair. The broom seemed to be hovering just above Dad's waist as he stared at the object as if it were foreign to him. Opening his long, wiry fingers, he watched it fall to the ground. Looking at Scott with a glazed-over stare, Dad walked out of the room without a word. That was the end of the punishment, at least for that day. Life went on. Something seemed different with the man, something the children were unable to explain. Dad didn't know what lay ahead of him as he continued his employment, but his career might have been the monster's undoing. I appreciate all of you who are watching my videos. Leaving a comment will help my videos get noticed more in the future and allow other people to view them. Also, purchasing one or both of my books will be very helpful. Thank you for your time and consideration. Chapter 35, A Face of Death. Facing another night as a prison guard, the weary man contemplated the new path that he had taken in his life. Entering the prison, Thomas heard shouts and loud talking as men on the cell block C talked to each other. While making his rounds, he walked to Jim's cell to check on the kid, since he hadn't seen him out in the hall. Looking in Jim's cell, Thomas saw the young man's blue lips, white ashen skin, blonde hair, and white foam flowing past the small piece of wadded cloth in the young man's mouth to prevent the inevitable gurgle of death that would escape his lips. Jim's body lay limp, dangling from the homemade rope fashioned from his light blue inmate t-shirt. The young man's soulless eyes were fixed in place as urine and feces dripped down the legs of his pants. Alarms began going off in the hollow metal confine, while a pool of liquid spread slowly beneath the lifeless man's body. As the young man's body hung against the heavy iron bars only inches from the ground, the lockdown of the prison began. Thomas's mind suddenly flashed back to a conversation that he had with the young man. "I can't take this SH anymore, Schultz," Thomas heard echoing in his brain as he tried to shake the tormenting image of the words which Jim spoke. But the memory was relentless as it continued on. "This place is killing me." Thomas stood next to the young man on the narrow walkway leading to the cell. Before stepping inside, Jim looked around at the open metal staircases and walkway railings, knowing that it was necessary, for it aided the guards in keeping track of the inmates in this large building. One could see each level and most of the activity which was going on around them. If a man shouted on the first level, the entire confines would be able to hear it. Even if a prisoner were snoring on the first level, every man would be able to hear it all the way up to the fifth level. The only closed off areas were the cells, which were 8 feet by 10 feet, holding 2 prisoners to a cell. It contained an open toilet, a small sink, stainless steel mirror, 2 metal framed bunk beds, and sometimes a small writing area. The inmates also had ample space for recreation, yet this is where many fights would begin. Many inmates called this cold prison home. Some would intentionally commit a crime after leaving the facility just so they would be able to come back to what they were familiar with. Of course, there was always the first-timers, but as the years would pass, many of them grew into their roles of being a criminal and continued to commit crimes. It seemed that this was the only life the inmates knew how to lead and felt comfortable within the security of its walls. Please like, share, and subscribe. I look forward to having you join me again next time, where I will show another topic. And I will continue to read from the book titled The Monster We Call Dad by D.A. Riles, which you can purchase from Amazon.com. Thank you for having joined me.